Morning.
Morning. Welcome to Fort Mackinac. My name is Craig. This is Andy, or Andy, excuse me. This is Danny. Trying to combine their names there. She's going to be leading a short walking tour for kids, talking about kids' life here at the fort right after the cannon is fired. So if you're interested in that children's tour, just follow her right down the steps here after we fire the cannon. But first, Andy and I are going to be demonstrating for you how we fire this 6-pound field cannon. Now, who can tell me why it's called a 6-pounder?
What the front weighs.
It's what the cannonball weighs, that's right. Fires a 6-pound ball. It's a little over 3.5 inches in diameter. This gun could fire that 6-pound ball upwards of a mile if it were being fired in combat. It's obviously what it's designed for. You fire that cannonball at walls, at fortifications, at ships, at masses of enemy troops, and it can cause a lot of destruction, even though it's only about that big around. However, it's very important to remember that although Fort Mackinac was open for 115 years as an active duty military post, and they had cannons mounted up here for nearly all of that time, of that 115 years, there are only a few hours that Fort Mackinac is actually engaged in any sort of combat. For the rest of that time, this is very peaceful and a very boring place. There's not a whole lot going on. That's especially true of the 1880s, which is the time period that we are talking about and interpreting today. At that point, there are still soldiers here, they still have cannons, but the fort doubles as a national park headquarters, and Mackinac Island is a tourist resort just like it is today. So 120 years ago, people were doing the exact same things that you're doing on Mackinac Island right now, riding bikes, riding carriages, exploring the island, even buying fudge. So there's no reason for the soldiers to come up here and fire cannonballs at those tourists. That'd be bad for business. The only reason that they fire their cannons is for ceremony. Every morning, for instance, you may actually have heard this about half an hour ago. Reveille is played, they fire a cannon, and the flag goes up. That wouldn't happen at 9:30 in the 1880s. That'd be at about 6:30. And that morning gun is kind of the alarm clock that wakes up the men and tells them that it's time to begin the day. They do the same thing in the evening at retreat. After dinner, they'd play retreat, they'd fire the cannon, the flag would come down. That's the end of the workday. So they actually end up firing the cannon almost twice a day for nearly all of the 1880s. But they can also fire for special occasions. So for instance, if someone important comes to visit, they're welcomed with a cannon salute. So if the governor comes to visit, if the commanding general comes to visit, if the colonel in command of our regiment comes to visit, they're all welcomed with cannon salutes. Same thing goes for national holidays. If there's something like the 4th of July or Memorial Day that is observed by the federal government, the official Army celebration is to fire cannons a prescribed number of times. Generally, it's a national cannon salute. That's one shot for every state in the Union. In the 1880s, there are 38 states, so they fired 38 times to celebrate those holidays. But again, in all of those cases, they are just firing blank powder charges. They're just using a little bit of gunpowder to make some noise and to make some smoke as part of their ceremony. They're never firing for battle. Now, to fire one of those blank salutes, 2 or 3 soldiers would come up here. One of them would have a leather patch on his thumb, just like I do. Use that to cover up the touch hole here at the back of the cannon, while one of the other men would begin cleaning. Now, the first cleaning tool that Andy is going to be running down is a worm. You'll see him spin it around there. That corkscrew on the end is designed to grab any sort of debris that's been left down here at the breech from our last shot. If that's burning debris, we need to get it out of the barrel before the gunpowder goes in. We don't want to set the cannon off prematurely. Now, to further prevent that, Andy's going to be running down a wet swab. So he's dipping it in a bucket of water. That means we'll have moisture introduced into the cannon barrel, but he's also creating a vacuum inside. Now, why would we want a vacuum inside the cannon barrel? What can't happen in a vacuum?
Air.
Fire. Things can't continue burning because there's no oxygen. You may have just heard that thunk there as he pulled the swab out of the muzzle. That was that vacuum collapsing. So we've used both water and air pressure in a vacuum to hopefully clean the cannon and make it safe to load. So Andy will now be inserting our powder charge, which this morning is about 3 ounces of gunpowder. That's a very small charge, keep in mind. In the 1880s, they would have been firing 10 ounces for these blank salutes. And to fire that 6-pound ball in combat, they used 20 ounces. Now he'll be running that down the barrel with this curved rammer, which you notice allows him to stand off to the side. This is It's not something they used in the 1880s. They had a straight ramrod, but this curved rammer allows us to stand off to the side, so if there would be something going wrong, we would be protected and we'd be just a little bit safer. Now Andy's going to step around to the back and he's going to take out a brass spike and run that down the touch hole where I had my thumb. Hopefully it's there. Let's see if we can find the brass spike. Now, we're tearing open the powder charge with this brass spike, and why do we want that spike to be brass?
Won't arc.
What was that?
It won't arc.
Yeah, it won't spark, that's exactly right.
Over here.
Oh.
That ring.
Oh, ring. Oh, there we go. Must have fallen off. Thank you.
Good eyes, guys, good eyes.
It's a good thing that they were just firing salutes and not firing in combat. Good thing that we're just firing a salute too. So he's using that spike to tear open that powder charge, and that's going to expose the gunpowder to a friction primer, which is what actually fires the cannon. A friction primer is just a little brass tube full of gunpowder. It has a friction-sensitive chemical at the top. You pull a pin through that, it sparks. That burns down onto the main charge, that explodes, and that's where we get the noise and the smoke for our salute. Very effective little devices, and they were regularly used here on the upper gun platform. They've done some archaeology up here and even down the hill, and they found thousands of these spent friction primers, original ones, just to give you an idea of how often that they were firing these blank salutes. They'd use them at least twice a day, and they'd just go flying up in the air and they'd land all over around here. And they recovered many of those. So with that, Andy will just be hooking up a lanyard to that friction primer. That'll give him enough leverage to pull out that pin while standing safely away from the cannon. So we have now cleaned, loaded, and primed the gun, so it's ready to fire. Now might be the time to cover your ears if you'd like. This will be just a little loud. Just use your fingertips. So if everyone's ears are covered, there are only two commands. They are ready, fire. All right, and there you have a cannon salute to welcome you here to Fort Mackinac this morning.